Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel where plant friends do what plant friends do. My name is Darylyn. Pippa is taking a nap today, and this is plant friend down the street. Hey plant friends. So I'm sure that I'm not the only one that's been noticing this lately or thinking about this lately, especially if you've been in the plant community for a couple of years or more than that. But plant trends really kind of ebb and flow and change. The most popular plants, the most expensive plants, none of that is set or fixed and none of that is static. And we're even now starting to get to the point with tissue culture where some of these plants that previously had been completely unobtainable for almost anyone to own in a private collection may start to becoming available in the next couple of years at prices that will actually be obtainable for some very rich people. Oh man, they're all just fucking plants, you guys. Regardless, one plant that I have noticed has really had a swift fall from grace over just the past year or so is actually one of my favorite problem children. The Philodendron Melanochrysum. And I have all of my Melanochrysum children sat back here to participate in this little discussion today. Why you guys gotta be buttholes, huh? What can't you act right? No reason? Nothing to say for yourselves? Right. So for those of you who are maybe newer to the plant community or for whom aroids really aren't your area of concentration, maybe you're not really aware that this has been going on. But if we just backtrack maybe like a little bit more than a year to a year and a half, Philodendron Melanochrysum was really having its moment. It was on everybody's wish list if they didn't already have it. I saw it unboxed by so many YouTubers. It was just everywhere. And as far as the whole dark, heart-shaped, velvet, aroids craze went, I mean, you really can't get much better than, you know, that. It's beautiful. I mean, it's so dark, it's almost black. And it's just stunning. Like when the leaves look good, they look amazing. And in addition to just being a beautiful, beautiful plant, Philodendron Melanochrysum started showing up on a lot of lists of good rare plants for beginners, or easy rare plants, or rare plants that don't need a ton of humidity, or rare plants that are super, super tough. And the prices just absolutely shot up. When I bought this plant, I got it, I don't know, a little bit more than a year ago now, and I paid $100 and I received 3 large leaves, fully rooted, potted up in soil. So I paid for that plant in the spring, and I'm sure, as you know, shortly after that, you couldn't even look at a Melanochrysum of that size for, depending on a couple of factors of, you know, how good it looked, you would be looking at close to $600 for the plant that I bought and paid $100 for. If you were looking to pay retail, of course, you can always get plants for cheaper than that if you know someone who has cuttings and, you know, you do a private sale or, you know, trade for something or something like that. But I'm not really exaggerating when I say that I would see semi-mature, kind of adolescent sized Melanochrysum with, you know, 3 leaves or so this big for $500, $600. Like, that was not a weird sight to see. But somewhere along the line, a lot of these shops figured out that most people are not going to be able to pay $500 or $600 for anything, let alone a luxury item like an exotic plant. So we started to see a lot of one-leaf cuttings, tiny baby stem propagation size plants going for much less than that, but they were still over $100, you know, into triple digits. Like a plant like this little baby one that I have here with these 4 little baby leaves, I mean, you probably could have gotten over $100 for this back then. I have no idea what this would go for now. Maybe even like closer to like 150 or 200. Like back in the heyday, the highest price point on Melanochrysum, when everybody wanted them, you couldn't get them anywhere. Like, yeah, I don't know. This was probably like close to $150. A plant like this with, you know, tons and tons of leaves on it like this, I mean, you could have snipped this plant at every single node and probably sold each leaf for $100. Melanochrysum was really, really hot for a while. And I think part of the reason was it got this reputation for being an easy rare plant, combined with the fact that you could get a piece of one, like you could get your foot in the door with a Melanochrysum for a comparably very accessible entry-level price compared to what a lot of the other rare plants were going for at the time. So what happened? Why is Melanochrysum kind of no longer considered this premium plant that everyone has to have? Prices have come down significantly. I mean, it used to be you couldn't look at one for less than $100 minimum for a tiny one. Now you can get them in, you know, Facebook Marketplace, sales groups and whatnot for much less than that. I mean, I think if you know the right person and you really do your research, you could probably get a little baby Melanochrysum for like $30 to $50 depending on where you live. So prices have come down a lot. And it's kind of interesting thinking about what happened there, because it's still a beautiful, beautiful plant. And you look at it and it's kind of, you think it's everything that you want in, you know, a dark velvet heart-shaped aroid. And the prices were pretty accessible. So why all of a sudden are they just not as sought after anymore? And I guess maybe the obvious answer would be, oh, well, everyone who wanted one got one. Yeah, and I mean, that's true. They're really not rare anymore. You know, they're probably going to be really hard to find if you only shop for plants at big box stores, hardware stores, retail nurseries in person, but they're everywhere, all over the internet. And once you get into the plant groups and you start talking to other plant people, you start to realize that like basically everybody has these, or everybody that like wants to put up with their bullshit has these. And you can easily get one if you want one, but there's a number of reasons why I think a lot of people at this point aren't even bothering with them anymore, which really is too bad because they are like beautiful, beautiful plants. But here's essentially what I think happened, is that they got a reputation for being a really tough, easy beginner rare plant. But this information and knowledge was put forth by people who really had the most experience caring for much more mature plants than what ended up being the entry-level price point for people looking to get a Melanochrysum. Because even though low triple digits, $100 or so, is really not a lot of money in the grand scheme of premium plants or rare plants, it's still a lot of money for basically everyone in the world. $100 for a luxury item, for something that you don't need or that isn't really going to serve much of a function other than just being ornamental and just purely for enjoyment, $100 is still a lot of money. So this knowledge was put out there back before the houseplant frenzy really took off by people who had been taking care of much larger, more mature plants, because back then you could get a larger Melanochrysum for about what like a tiny one-leaf cutting would cost you at the peak. And anyone who's taking care of a lot of plants knows that baby plants are just a lot more difficult. They're a lot more finicky. And they don't all survive, you know? Baby plants, it's just like with anything, any sort of animals or species out in the wild, a lot of them will put out a lot of offspring and only the strongest survive. And so in an artificial environment where there aren't as many survival pressures, you're gonna get specimens surviving that are maybe not the strongest. So essentially what happened here was people said, oh, these are really easy plants because they had experience with the plant, but they had experience with the plant in a little bit more mature form. Everybody was like, oh my God, so pretty, have to have it. Oh, let me save some money and get a tiny little baby one for the cheapest I can find, and I'll just grow the plant up. It'll grow and I'll save money and it'll be awesome. And then a lot of these people got these plants and started to realize that they're actually really finicky, especially when they're really juvenile. And there's a structural feature of the Melanochrysum that makes it much more difficult and finicky when it's in its juvenile state than some of these other climbing philodendrons, and that is that the Melanochrysum continues to push new growth, so the new leaves, out of a petiolar sheath rather than a freestanding cataphyll for much, much, much longer than something like a Verrucosum, a Gloriosum, even Philodendron luxurians. Anything that is crossed with a Verrucosum generally tends to get that cataphyll very, very juvenile as compared to the Melanochrysum, which really holds on to it for a long time. And the result of this is that the Melanochrysum has a really hard time pushing its leaves out without ripping through them unless it has really high humidity. So just for a little bit of context here, all of these Melanochrysum you see right here, they all came from this plant. And I've had this plant over a year and some change now. And I've also had a Philodendron splendid, which is the Melanochrysum and the Verrucosum hybrid. It's also known as the MXV. The Philodendron splendid has been much, much easier for me to deal with because it retains that Verrucosum characteristic of forming a cataphyll that is separate from the petiole at a much more juvenile state. And so there's just a lot less for it to get caught up on in there. The issue with the Melanochrysum is that as the leaf is coming out of the petiolar sheath, it kind of will do that Cinderella slipper thing where it gets stuck in the sheath, and then the curved part of the petiole will push against the leaf to the point where it has cut off the circulation to those cells and they die and become weaker, and it just punches through. And as you can see, that's essentially what's happened here to this leaf. There's a nice little mid-rib hole. Super rare mid-rib hole Melanochrysum. It has fenestrations. Yeah, Melanochrysum are not supposed to have fenestrations. It's a bonus. No, but really though. And so because these people who were the ones on the internet saying that Melanochrysum was so easygoing and so tough, we're working with more mature specimens. They weren't really realizing that this was going to be a problem for so many people. And the other thing too is that in order to get the plant to mature to the size where it's going to form a cataphyll, the plant needs to grow. So it becomes this self-defeating cycle of the plant isn't maturing, so it's ripping through its leaves and it's not growing. But then it's not growing because it keeps ripping through its leaves, so it can't mature to the point where it can form a cataphyll. Of course, there are ways to work around this. You know, I have had a lot of success with just adding a little bit of Super Thrive to a spray bottle and keeping an eye on the plant and just spritzing those new leaves with the Super Thrive water to give it a little bit of lubrication to help it push it out of the petiolar sheath. And that definitely does work. You know, you can see the results here on this leaf. This leaf came out absolutely stunning. But the caveat to that is that you have to be on it every single time, because if you miss it and you don't have enough humidity in your environment, the plant may punch through its leaf again, and you end up with a whole pole of things that look like this. And honestly, that one I kind of was able to salvage. I noticed what it was doing in time to start misting it and to kind of pull it out of the sheath, and so there was only a little bit of damage that it sustained at the time. But I mean, could you imagine how much better this would look if that didn't have a giant hole in it? So it can get really, really frustrating. And if you don't know that you can kind of mitigate the situation by misting the growth points, the leaves don't just end up with little holes in them, they end up shredding themselves. So I think that this is part of the reason why the Melanochrysum has just really fallen out of favor. I think people are really just sick of dealing with this shit because they were told the plant was super easy, and they were told the plant doesn't require super high humidity, and they thought, oh, you know, this is something that I can definitely like get my foot in the door in because I can save up to buy a plant in the low triple digits. And then they've had nothing but issues with it. So I just completely see why this happened. And it's really just a shame too, because the plant is beautiful and it truly is extremely hard to kill. I honestly think that in order for me to kill these plants, I would legitimately have to just leave them alone and not touch them and not do a single thing to them until they either died from lack of water or they got a pest and it just went out of control and killed them that way. I really truly maintain that if you have just the baseline level of giving a shit and you provide your plants with the most basic level of care, you're gonna have a really hard time killing a Melanochrysum. Unless, you know, it freezes in your house or something crazy. If you have reasonable conditions and you're willing to provide reasonable care, it's really hard to kill these plants. They are really resilient, but in addition to it being really hard to kill them, it's really, really hard to make them happy. They're pretty sensitive. A lot of times, even if you do manage to get your hands on a plant that is a little bit bigger or more mature, they come with way fewer roots than is really needed to sustain the size of the plant. And they have a reputation for being shipped and then reverting to pushing out tiny, tiny leaves. And that's exactly what happened with this one. I wasn't able to get it to give me big leaves. I actually had to cut it, and then I got this little leaf, which was actually at the time the biggest leaf the plant had given me, and then it started giving me bigger leaves. But you got to think about the size of the root ball on the mother plant that produced those leaves in comparison to the roots you're getting. I got that plant in a 4-inch pot. It was rooted, sure, it had enough roots to stay alive, but Melanochrysum are climbing plants, and I mean, they basically never stop growing if their growth points are not damaged, and so it really wasn't anywhere near enough roots for the plant to make leaves that big. So I just think that this plant is very, very misunderstood. It is, of course, true that it's really not a good beginner plant. You'll be very frustrated with it because we all get Melanochrysum because we see the pictures of it when it's mature and it's huge. We don't get it because we see plants that are this big. We want the big giant leaves, and although it is very, very easy to keep the Melanochrysum alive, it's extremely hard to keep it happy enough to get it to mature to the point where it looks like your inspo pics, or that it forms a caterpillar and stops shredding its leaves. I think if you really are in the market for a Melanochrysum and you really, really want one because you genuinely love the plant and you're able to, I really just advise that you pay the money and get a plant that is already mature enough that it has that freestanding caterpillar and it is not pushing growth out of the petiolar sheath anymore. And if you're not able to do that because it's just out of your price range, or you're not comfortable with importing plants, or you just can't find one, because I'm not gonna lie, although Melanochrysum is readily available everywhere, you can find it super easily at this point in late spring, early summer of 2021. Finding a plant that is mature and has a freestanding caterpillar and that is in good condition is really difficult. You're still probably looking at $500 or $600 for something like that, unless you have a really, really nice friend who has more melano than they know what to do with. So I really, really love the Melanochrysum. I do think it is worth it to keep once you have the hang of it, but if you can only afford to get a small one, my advice is honestly just keep it either in a grow tent or a Millsbow or a terrarium or a cloche or somewhere with really, really, really high humidity, just keep it in there until it matures to the point where it forms that caterpillar. And if it grows too tall, just cut it, propagate the top cutting, and then just start over and let it grow up until it gets to the point where it gets that caterpillar, because otherwise you're going to be dealing with a lot of the same issues that other people dealt with that really turned them off the plant in the first place. It really is a great plant, but it just really isn't a set it and forget it, thrive on neglect kind of plant. You're gonna have to put some work in to get satisfaction out of it. And to be honest, if you want something like this, but you want something that's a lot less high maintenance and it's just gonna be easier for you, just spend the money and get a Splendid. You really can get away with getting a pretty small baby Philodendron Splendid, and it shouldn't give you too many issues. I have mine sitting just out in open air in my bedroom. Humidity in here tends to fluctuate between about 55 and 65. I've never had an issue with my Splendid, and my Splendid is not a super mature plant. It's definitely still of the size where if it was a Melanochrysum, it would have been punching through its leaves. I think the biggest leaf on the Splendid is smaller than this leaf here. So great plant. That plant I actually would say would be fine for a beginner to take on as, you know, a treat yourself to a fancy plant kind of indulgence. You should be fine with it as long as you do your research and you find really good soil for it. I really wouldn't recommend putting a philodendron with roots as fine as that into like the 1/3 orchid bark, 1/3 potting soil, 1/3 perlite mix that everyone had in their head in 2019 was gonna be a good all-purpose aroid mix. It's not. Don't do that. As long as you have done good research and talked to people who actually have Splendids, and then you follow their directions, like you'll be fine with a Splendid. They're great. You can't give them nothing humidity-wise. Like they do need something, but they're still gonna do just fine and not rip themselves apart and self-fenestrate and give you holes in humidity in like the 50s. So that is that. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. I hope you learned something, and if you didn't, then at least I hope you had a laugh. And thanks for chilling with me, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!